Hello again, YouTube. This is my second video. Last time I covered some of the basic stuff you can do with sprites, objects, and rooms. And in this video, I'll be covering some very basic code that you can do. So you have a very basic playable game. Specifically, I'll be covering how to move. So we can, as you can see, I've taken the liberty of changing the previous sprite, the red and black mess of colors, into a nice red ball, and I've renamed it red ball, as you can see. And the object still, even without resetting it, will take on this stuff. Will take on the red ball sprite. I did not particularly set it to the red ball sprite; it just automatically inherited it. So we can just call this. I'm going to call this O red ball, and so I'm just using the O underscore prefix to just say that it's an object. This is not necessary. I'm just using it to keep things organized. But yeah. So then I've also deleted all of the objects in the room except for this one, which I've just placed down now. Really. So I'm just going to put that at the center of the room at x equals 256, y equals 256. We can just run this and it'll still run. You can see that it's right there. But what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to be covering how to get very basic movement. And this includes the x and y variables. So GameMaker functions on a coordinate grid. And I should probably, before I get into code, show you this. As you can see, if I mouse around the room, it'll sort of show the x and y of the mouse position. And really, this is on the grid scale. So these are all like multiples of 16, since my grid is 16 by 16. But it'll show you just sort of the x and y. So this object has an x of 256 and a y of 256. And it's hard to actually show that because it always switches back. But anyway, so what I'm going to do is I'm now going to take the object and I'm going to add the step event. So the step event, as I mentioned last video, is sort of a constant event. I didn't really do anything with it last video though. So right now I'm going to execute code, and I'm going to use one of the built-in variables of GameMaker, the x variable, or the x coordinate of the object. So if you don't know coordinate plane stuff, I'm going to be using it a lot, so you might want to just research it. But I'm pretty sure a lot of people will know how to use a basic coordinate plane. Anyway, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the x variable, and as you can see, there's an error. There's an error because just a plain variable isn't anything. So I'm going to set it to +=1. Actually, let's just make that 2, so it's a little faster. But what plus equals does is it basically says add 2 to the variable. So what this is that every single frame, the x is added to by 2. So now if we run the game, you can see it'll just load for just take a little second to load. But as you can see, it's actually moving. And if I set the room speed a little higher, back to 60 frames per second, it'll be a lot faster and a lot smoother than this little jerky move 5 pixels. But yeah, as you can see, it's just sort of going, and it'll go off screen because there's nothing to stop it. And then we can also use the y variable. So let's just say we use y minus equals 1. Now, minus equals, it subtracts from it. Like plus equals adds to it, minus equals subtracts from it. You'd expect that. But the thing is, if we run this, and it'll just take a small amount of time, the ball is actually going up, even though we're subtracting from y. And this is because the GameMaker coordinate system is kind of weird, kind of different than most mathematics, in that it starts at x equals 0, y equals 0. X becomes greater as you go right, and y becomes greater as you go down. So if you want to go up, you can subtract from your y. If you want to go down, you can add to your y. If you want to go right, you can add to your x. And if you want to go left, you can subtract from your x. Excuse me. So yeah, that's basically how the coordinates work. And let's say we can just run this, but let's say we don't want the sprite to just go right off the screen, because you see there's nothing stopping it. So what we can do now is we can set basically some sort of collision. This is not going to be a collision with like another object like you can sometimes have, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to say if x, and if basically the if keyword basically takes something after it. So if I say if x is greater than 512, this will basically be testing if x is greater than 512. And then I can add some curly brackets to tell it what to do, and I'll say x equals x previous. So x previous is basically another built-in variable, which is the x from the previous step, the previous frame. And so also curly brackets basically tell the program what it needs to do here. You can put them anywhere. You don't have to indent. I could just sort of delete these. As long as you have what you want to do encircled in curly brackets, it's probably going to register it. So like if you just type something like this, it'll work fine. Or if you type something like this, it'll work fine. But what this is doing is that it tests if x is greater than 512, and if that is true, x equals x previous. So we can test to see how this works right here. So we're going to see it goes up, and then it goes off screen. Now this may be because of another thing, which is that the red ball is currently set to its upper left corner. And as you can see, that's sort of transparent. It's sort of going off the edge of the red ball. So now what we can do is we can set the origin to the center. So this means that the ball is going to have its center as its XY position. So if we look at this, this will probably work a little better. And as you can see, it just stops about halfway through. And it'll keep going up because we haven't added a collision with the Y yet. And let's do that. So if we say if Y is less than 0, because it's subtracting, Y equals Y previous. And Y is basically the exact same thing as X previous, but with Y instead. So let's see how this works now. So we'll just see, what I'll expect it to happen is it'll go right, and then it'll go up, and then stop. Okay. So yeah, that's pretty much it. If you noticed any sounds or anything, or my silence, that was because my cat was making noises in the other room. So yeah, so that's basically, just to review, so you can add or subtract from variables, and in this video I used x and y, and you can just sort of use any number here. You can use the if statement to test if something is true, and acceptable things here are greater than, less than, equals, or this means not equals. And then you can also use greater than or equal to, or less than or equal to, and you type them like that. I'm just going to say greater than because that's the only one that works. And then finally, let's review x previous and y previous. They're basically just your position from the previous step. Oh yeah, and then origin, just reviewing origin, it's where your x and y appear from on the sprite. So currently, on the object, because it has the sprite, its x and y are the center of this ball. So yeah, that's pretty much all I want to talk about in this video. I just showed you how to basically move some objects, their x and y stuff. So yeah, I'm just gonna end off the video here. See you next time, YouTube.